In the cold silence of the underground, there are places where even sound refuses to travel, places where the air feels heavy, where footsteps echo long after you've stopped walking, and where something unseen watches from the corners you can't quite see. Imagine entering a space so dark that your own breathing feels unfamiliar. A place that generations of locals have avoided for reasons they never fully speak about. Tonight's story begins in one of those forgotten corners of the world, a place known simply as the Dark Places. A name given not by poets or storytellers, but by the people who have lived their whole lives, fearing what lies beneath their feet. Before this story ends, you'll understand why. Deep in the countryside of Scotland, hidden beneath an old stretch of land that once held air raid shelters and escape tunnels, there exists a network of chambers built during a time of war and fear. Over the decades, these tunnels were sealed, abandoned, and eventually erased from official maps. But while the world above moved on, something inside those walls remained awake. Locals tell stories of strange whispers that rise from the ground during winter nights, of footsteps trailing behind them near the old entrances, and of travelers who once wandered too close and returned days later unable to explain where they had been. The authorities blame collapsing structures and old ventilation shafts, but the villagers insisted it's something older, something that has lived in the dark for far too long. Our story takes shape when construction workers uncovered a forgotten entrance in the early 1900s. They expected to find rusted metal, old bricks, maybe a few artifacts from the war. What they found instead was a carved message scratched deep into the wall, a warning so desperate it felt alive. Do not enter. They still live in the dark places. The workers laughed at first, thinking it was an old prank. But the laughter stopped when the air changed, when the temperature dropped sharply, when the echoes became louder than the footsteps, causing them, and when one of the workers swore that something brushed past his leg, even though nothing was there. From that moment, the stories surrounding the dark places were no longer rumors. They became a documented chain of events. Unexplained injuries, missing reports, and investigations that ended with sealed entrances and files marked inconclusive. But that was only the beginning. Tonight, we will go deeper into these tunnels than even the workers dared. We will revisit the evidence, the witnesses, and the chilling discoveries made by the documentary team that entered decades later. And by the end of this journey, you may find yourself wondering whether some darkness is merely the absence of light, or if something far more real waits within it. The discovery happened by accident. In 1974, a construction team was clearing old ground near an abandoned military site in Scotland. Their job was simple: level the soil, build a small access road, and move on. But as the bulldozer pushed aside a mound of earth, the ground below it collapsed with a hollow echo. Dust shot upward, and beneath the fallen soil, a narrow stone opening appeared, cracked and sealed with rusted metal plating. No one could understand why it wasn't on any blueprint. The supervisor assumed it was one of the old war-era tunnels, forgotten over time. But the workers noticed something strange before they even stepped inside. The air escaping from the opening wasn't stale or dusty. It was cold, unnaturally cold, as if the darkness beneath had been waiting for a chance to breathe again. Curiosity won, and two workers volunteered to check the interior. As their flashlights sliced through the narrow tunnel, they found scratch marks along the entrance. Deep lines carved into the stone, almost like fingernail traces. At the far end of the tunnel, they discovered a carved sentence that made the men laugh nervously. "Do not enter. They still live in the dark places." But their laughter faded when a distant noise echoed from somewhere deep inside the chamber, something like a dragging movement. Too heavy to be a rat, too deliberate to be the wind. And for the first time, the team realized they might have uncovered something that should have stayed hidden forever. The two workers, James and Fletcher, stepped deeper into the tunnel while the others waited outside. Their flashlights flickered as if the darkness inside was resisting the light itself. The farther they walked, the colder the air became. The walls were damp, covered in a thin layer of black residue that smeared across their hands whenever they brushed against it. Fletcher joked nervously that it looked like burned fingerprints, but his voice cracked halfway through, betraying his fear. James pointed his torch toward a corner where something metallic reflected the light. It was an old helmet, the type worn by World War II emergency workers, its surface dented from the inside as if someone had tried to smash their way out. As they moved forward, they heard a thud behind them, slow, heavy, and deliberate. Both men froze. They turned their lights toward the sound, but nothing was there. only the empty tunnel stretching into darkness. James whispered that someone might be down there, maybe a vagrant or someone trapped, but a second thought, closer this time, shattered that hope. Fletcher panicked and grabbed James's arm, insisting they return. When they turned to leave, Fletch let out a sharp cry. Something cold, firm, unseen had closed around his wrist. He felt fingers digging into his skin, pulling him backward. James pulled him free, and they ran stumbling, slipping, desperate to escape as whispered breaths followed them up the tunnel like living shadows. When the men returned to the surface, Fletcher's wrist was covered in deep red marks, each indentation shaped like a human finger. The team called the police immediately, but the officers dismissed the injury as scraping against jagged stone. They refused to enter the tunnel themselves, claiming the site was unstable. But James insisted they listen. He described the sounds, the whispers, the metallic dents inside the helmet, and the freezing air. The officers reluctantly sent one man inside with a torch, but he didn't go far. Within 2 minutes, he came out pale, shaken, refusing to explain what he saw. He simply told the team to seal the entrance and file it under hazardous terrain. However, the workers later discovered something the police never mentioned. On the official report sheet, someone had handwritten a note in the margin. Whispers confirmed. Possible human presence unknown. Avoid further descent. But the public version of the report erased all of this. It stated that the tunnel held no significant findings. Over the next week, locals began sharing stories that matched the workers' experienced stories of footsteps echoing at night, shadows moving near the sealed entrance, and strange cold drafts rising from the ground even though the tunnel was now welded shut. Something inside had awakened, and the ground seemed to know it. A retired police officer, Mr. Callum, later revealed the truth behind why authorities refused to investigate. According to him, disappearances had been happening near these tunnels for decades. In 1952, a 19-year-old boy vanished after telling friends he heard breathing under the ground. In 1961, a farmer went missing while repairing a fence line above the same area. Search teams found his tools neatly placed on the grass, but no footprints leading away. The strangest case occurred in 1968 when a hiker was discovered wandering a field 3 days after he disappeared. His clothes were covered in black dust, and he kept muttering, "The hands keep scratching but equal-denti," explained where he had been. Callum admitted that each case had something in common: cold air rising from the soil, strange, echoing sounds, and witnesses reporting the feeling of being watched from below. Yet every case was buried by higher authorities. They blamed natural cave systems, wildlife, or hallucinations. But the villagers believed something darker lived below the ground, something that fed on silence, darkness, and fear. And with the tunnel now reopened, some believed it would start searching for the living once again. In 2021, nearly 50 years after the workers first discovered the entrance, a group of online documentary filmmakers decided to investigate the dark places. They specialized in exploring abandoned military sites and underground structures. When they heard about the sealed chamber in Scotland, they knew it was their next big project. They obtained permission to film the surroundings, not to enter, but to document the history. Of course, they planned to go further. Their equipment included night vision cameras, thermal sensors, and high-sensitivity microphones. As soon as they approached the sealed door, their audio recorders detected strange fluctuations, as if low-frequency sounds were emerging from beneath the metal plate. One of the crew members placed his ear against the cold steel and immediately stepped back, claiming he heard someone breathing on the other side. Ignoring warnings, they cut through the rusted layers and reopened the tunnel. They felt the same unnatural cold the workers described decades earlier. They set up cameras along the walls and began their descent. At first, everything looked normal: old bricks, decayed beams, scattered debris, but then their microphones picked up the faint sound of footsteps. Not theirs, not the echo of their own movements, but a slow, delayed pattern, matching them only after they stopped walking. Further inside the tunnel, the team discovered an area that didn't appear on any schematics. A narrow passageway curved downward, leading to a heavy metal door half buried in dust. The door was bent outward, as if something had pushed it from the inside with tremendous strength. Carved into the metal were dozens of claw-like marks, not animal, not tool-made, but disturbingly human in shape, long and desperate. The team managed to force the door fully open, Behind it was a hidden chamber, larger than the rest of the tunnel. The walls were covered with scratches, faint handprints, and long smears of black residue. One of the filmmakers whispered, "Someone lived here," but another corrected him. No, someone was trapped here. At the far end of the room, they found a small pile of rotted wooden boards. Beneath them lay a torn piece of fabric and what appeared to be a fragment of a journal cover. The pages had long decayed, but one single piece of writing remained faintly visible. We stayed in darkness, and darkness stayed in us. As they examined the room, their thermal camera detected a sudden cold spot shaped vaguely like a crouched figure. But when they turned their lights in that direction, nothing was there, only the feeling of being watched. Things took a terrifying turn when they decided to switch off their flashlights and rely entirely on night vision. In complete darkness, the tunnel felt alive. Their cameras revealed moving shadows, shapes that weren't visible to the naked eye. One crew member felt a cold hand brush against his shoulder, though no one was near him. He began to panic, breathing heavily, insisting something had grabbed him. The team tried to calm him, but then every camera caught it in. Elongated shadows stretching across the tunnel floor, slowly creeping toward them. Suddenly, all their equipment malfunctioned at once. Lights flickered, audio became distorted, and the thermal sensor began screaming with alerts. The shadow moved behind one filmmaker, rising like someone standing upright. He froze, unable to speak. Then, a whisper filled the tunnel, captured clearly on all microphones. "You should not be here." The entire crew ran, stumbling through the darkness, following their own echoes out of the chamber. But just before they reached the exit, one of their cameras captured a hand-long, skeletal, pitch black reaching from the wall, as if the stone itself had come alive to stop them. The crew burst out of the tunnel, shaking, terrified, unable to understand what followed them in the dark. The documentary team never released their footage publicly. Rumors say government officials confiscated everything within hours. The crew gave a single statement. They would never speak of what happened again. But one of them, unable to sleep for weeks, anonymously leaked audio online. The file contained faint breathing, dragging footsteps, and the whispered words, "We stay in the dark places." Experts tried to debunk it, but the sound pattern didn't match any human voice. They said it was layered, distorted, and older than any recording equipment could create. Authorities sealed the tunnel permanently, covering it with concrete and steel plates. But locals still claim to hear echoes beneath the ground at night. Some say the cold breeze still escapes the soil during winter, carrying voices that sound like warnings. Others believe whatever lived in the dark chamber was once human left too long in silence and darkness until it changed into something else entirely. Today, the area is off. There are no signs, no markers, only a stretch of land where nothing grows properly. Travelers who walk past it often feel uneasy, as though watched by invisible eyes. And if you ever visit on a quiet night, you might hear the faint scratching beneath your feet, a reminder that some places were never meant to be opened, and some darkness was never meant to see the light. In the end, the story of the dark places leaves us with more questions than answers. The tunnels have been sealed, the reports locked away, and the voices of those who witnessed the truth have fallen silent. But silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means something is still listening, still waiting. The cold wind that rises from that forgotten patch of land, the strange echoes heard by villagers at night, and the unexplained chills travelers feel even though all of it reminds us that whatever lives beneath the ground has never really gone. It simply endures. In the darkness, it calls home. Maybe the warnings carved on the walls were never meant for the workers or the documentary team. Maybe they were meant for all of us. Because some places hold memories that refuse to fade, secrets that refuse to die, and shadows that refuse to stay in the past. And when those shadows whisper, even after decades, we should listen. If you enjoyed this journey into one of the world's most haunting mysteries, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more dark true stories. Be careful out there, because sometimes the darkest places are much closer than we think.
Make sure to subscribe for the next story and secrets you won't want to miss it.